Grace to you and peace from God our Creator and Christ our Redeemer. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. I think that this is my favorite version of the Easter story. I mean, what a dramatic way to end the gospel. There is no theological interpretation, no pious commentary from the narrator, just raw emotion. It is such a human response. Of course, the way Mark ends the gospel story leaves a lot of questions. Did the three women really tell no one about the resurrection? If so, how did the other disciples find out? How did we find out, for that matter? But most importantly, what happened next? The grave is empty. Jesus has risen and has gone ahead to meet the others in Galilee. So what happened? Mark's gospel builds to the crescendo of the empty tomb, but then leaves it all hanging, leaves us all hanging in suspense. Of course, not everyone can appreciate a cliffhanger ending. So at a later time, a shorter and then a slightly longer ending was added to Mark, which you can read in your Bibles, to try and answer at least some of these questions. But the original ending is still my favorite. I think it's because terror and amazement are the correct response to a direct encounter with God. And let's be clear, that is what the resurrection is. In the resurrection, we are witnesses with our own eyes to the very heart of God. The emptiness of the tomb is nothing less than the vastness of the divine mystery. We get hung up with these three women not saying anything, but silence is the correct response when the voice of God speaks. And the silence of a stone that has already been rolled away is none other than the voice of God calling out to a beloved creation, calling out to a beloved people who have become so lost and gone so far astray. Yes, silence is the correct response in order that God's voice might be heard clearly at last. The question is, what is it that God speaks to us? Because the truth is, we hunger to hear God's voice. We long for the transformation that it brings. Because when I look at the world around us, I see so much brokenness, so much suffering, so much woundedness, longing to be healed. I have watched, along with so many of you and so many others around the world, in horror at the suffering and death caused by the Israel and Palestine war. The images of the destruction and devastation of children lost or orphaned by violence. And I've watched with sadness at the way the conflict has sent divisions ricocheting through our society so that we cannot even talk about the conflict without it being a fraught endeavor. And I look around me and I see political uncertainty spreading like a virus across the globe, but perhaps most visibly in our neighbor to the south, where everything has become a political fight, and every aspect of society a battlefield of ideologies. Never has a sense of unity or trust seemed so far away. And I watch with concern, along with many of you, as that same sort of social discord creeps north into our own discourse and social function. My friends, I look out at our communities, at our own city, and I see just bad news. I see our people dying at the hands of an epidemic of drug abuse and addiction, and I see people of all walks of life succumbing to the despair that it brings. And I see our elected leaders wringing their hands. I see them holding press conferences and public forums, and I watch as funding gets cut and the very prevention programs that could save lives threatened. I watch as more people continue to die. Let me tell you, if I never have to attend another drug-induced death, if I never have to pray over another life cut short, a life never lived, it will be too soon. But it doesn't end there. When I'm honest with myself, when I peer into my own life, I can see my own brokenness, my own wounds. I know the things I intend to do. I know the person I want to be. I know all too well the many ways that I fall short. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak indeed. Perhaps you do too. Perhaps you too can feel the ragged edges of the broken places within you. Perhaps you can feel the sting of wounds within that refuse to heal. After all, who among us isn't aware, painfully aware of our own failings? Who isn't haunted by our own demons and fears? Who doesn't know the many ways that we fall short of the people we want to be? Who doesn't grieve the hurt and the pains that we have caused others by our own brokenness? But in the tomb, my friends, in the tomb, Jesus gathers all our brokenness, all our wounds, all our desires that lead us so far astray. He gathers them to himself. In the emptiness of the grave, God gathers the beloved creation, God's beloved people, to God's own self. And we who come to the tomb seeking a place of grief and death find instead a place where grace abounds. Alleluia, Christ is risen, the angels proclaim to us. Alleluia, he has gone ahead of you on the way and will meet you there. And amidst a creation overflowing with chaos, in the silence of the tomb, God speaks the words of the new creation. Alleluia, Christ is risen. What else can we do but be silent?